Alright, hey guys, Mikoshi here. Today we're going to be talking about how to stop dying with your tornado shot. Basically, I'm going to be talking to you guys about how to make your tornado shot a bit tankier and for you not to die as frequently. I've been very busy, so that's why it took a bit of time to post the video. As well, I'm working on different projects, notably the Immortal tornado shot build, which is mostly done. It still needs more min-maxing, but it's not my top priority, because I know most people won't be able to achieve that type of build. As well, it's in standard, so I know a lot of players don't like standard. I'm also trying to make the strongest tornado shot in terms of DPS. It's currently 14 billion DPS, and the POB, once every item is, well, we have every item, it's gonna reach a total of 50 billion DPS, which is absolutely stupid. But that's, not my priority. It's just more of a side project to do for fun. By the way, we have a Discord as well as a new guild that we made. Feel free to join. There will be links in the description. All you have to do is join the Discord. We have other POBs. You can ask me questions personally. You can ask questions to our helpers. We have a nice community in the Discord, and we just reached 5,000 people, which is kind of crazy. And the Heavens Guild, which is a guild we just made. For now, it's open for everybody. I think right now we have 60 or 70 members, and yeah, feel free to join. Now let's hop into the video. Today I'm going to be talking about what is EHP, then our evasion, armor, spell suppression, damage shifting, delay damage, overleech and cool tech you can use with it, Bloodnotch, immunities, and reduced effects, and what to choose for your Ascendancy. I'll be giving at the same time practical ways to add them to your build. I'll also be talking about Flasks, something that a lot of people tend to not think about, and then touch a bit on the impacts on the rest of the build. Alright, so EHP. It describes how much damage can be absorbed after all damage mitigation sources have been calculated, right? Basically, the more EHP you have, the tankier you are. Let's say I have 1000 HP and I have no defenses, so 0 res, 0 armor, 0 evasion. My EHP will basically be 1000. That means if I get hit by an attack that deals 1000 damage, I will die. So that's my maximum EHP. Now if I do double my HP, so I now have 2000 life, my EHP will be 2000. Now let's say we go back to the first example where you have 1000 life, but you have a 50% resistance to cold, right? And you get attacked. The maximum hit for cold damage that you can take is not 1000, but it's 1500. But for the rest, for example, lightning damage, chaos damage, physical damage, it will be 1000 nonetheless. Now let's say that you have minus 50% cold resistance. You'll have a 666 EHP against cold hits and 1000 for the rest, making that your EHP will drop. Now the example with the 50 cold res is often what people have with chaos resistance, leaving it completely uncapped at minus 60, which means that most of the time when you get one tapped, it's highly likely that it's just a big chaos hit. Now, if you max out all your defenses except one, your total EHP will take a hit, right? So example, I'm 90 armor, 95 evade, 75% elemental resistance, but minus 60 chaos res, my EHP won't be that high. Now, but let's say I only run content that does not deal chaos damage, then my EHP will be technically higher than what it is shown in POB. So be careful about that, okay? Alright, so there's different ways to raise your EHP, and there's two categories. There's the not getting hit, which is, for example, block, evading, dodging. I think dodging doesn't exist anymore, but whatever. Avoiding, or reducing an enemy's monster accuracy, which ends up you evading, or damage mitigation. There's physical damage, right, with armor, resistance, buffs for you, debuffs to others, ascendancy, auras, curses, flask, etc., etc. The list goes on. Now, before we get into the video, it's important to note the difference between a hit and damage over time. Hit is the term that refers to an effect that applies a discrete amount of damage to a target instantaneously. The damage can be mitigated down to 0, but can never be negative, right? So you can't gain life if you get hit. Now, damage dealt by hits always come from one of those three damage sources, which is an attack, a spell, or a secondary type of damage. Secondary type of damage is basically you take damage at certain intervals of time, right? It's not damage over time. It's a damage every certain amount of time. Let's say I take 10 damage every 1 second. I take 10 damage the first second. I don't take any damage between the first and the second, but the second, I get another 10 damage, right? While dot damage would be I take damage over 1 second. So between 0 to 1 second, I take a complete 10 damage over that certain amount of time. Unlike the 3 other sources, damage over time does not hit, okay? That's important to understand because some defenses will not work on damage over time as they only work on hits. For example, evasion, armor, spell suppression. They will not help you against damage over time. Some resistance, however, will work with both, right? Such as our resistances. Okay, resistance theory. Pretty straightforward. Resistance are the #1 priority on our defense. 75% resistance means we simply take 25% of damage. We can, however, increase our maximum resistance, right? If we increase our max resistance up to 80, right, which is only a 5% extra, we take now 20% of the damage. And then compared to our normal capped 75%, we would take 20% less damage. Now, capped resistance with max resistance is great. And don't forget your chaos resistance. Now, scaling our elemental resistance in practice is pretty much the easiest thing. Paired with omniscience, you can get yourself capped pretty easily. Now, thanks to melding the flesh, purity of ice, and tattoos, which can give you increased elemental maximum resistance, it is very easy compared to before to add additional elemental resistance. Now, I talked about purity of ice. Why purity of ice? Well, because we're on the dexterity side of the tree, which means the tattoos that work on dexterity are for cold. So we want both to synergize well with melding of the flesh, so we will go for a purity of ice if needed. Something that a lot often discard, however, is going to be your chaos resistance, which can be important as you will often get one shot if you leave it at -60. Now for chaos, often what I like to do is to use the 12 passive cluster with chaos resistance, right? That could go up to 5%. And then you add the 35% increased effect. If you use all 10 nodes, you can go up to 50% per 12 passive cluster. Using after that a flask, especially with Mage Blood, you can cap out that 75% or nearly cap it out, right? It's not top priority, but at least, having plus 30, 40%, it really makes your build feel great. All right, now let's talk about evasion. Evasion is going to be the first layer of the defense that increases a character's chance to evade incoming attacks. Evasion is going to be opposed by your attacker's accuracy. What's good about evasion is if you do evade, you simply do not take any amount of damage from hits. If you get a 50% chance to evade, that means you only get hit half the time, which can be a huge survivability boost. It's often going to be used by lower defense characters, such as ranger builds. Now, when we think of evasion, we're going to think immediately about Grace. Grace will help us a ton with flat evasion as well as increases. As well, the usage of a flask, especially with Mage Blood, can help a ton with evasion. Now for armor. Armor is a form of defense that mitigates incoming physical damage from hits. It's usually going to be used by tankier builds. Playing a long-range character, we're often not near enemies' attack, right? So physical hits can hurt, but are often not what you should invest a ton into. Yes, they will make your EHP number go a ton higher, but in reality, evasion is going to be much more important for us. Using determination could be a good solution for armor, but we would have to replace one of our damage auras, and if we already use Grace, we will have to drop a lot of DPS, and as we know, offense is the best defense. We will be using a lightning coil, which reduces the importance of scaling our armor. If you really want extra armor, maybe a simple flask can do the job, but thanks to our damage shifting, armor won't be our top priority. We will get back to that a bit later. Now, spell suppression. Spell suppression is going to be the layer of defense that gives a chance to reduce damage from spells. The chance to reduce the damage is a random roll per spell hit. Now, if you do suppress, that means you will suppress 50% of that damage. That means at 100% spell suppression, you only take half the damage from spells. So you guys know the drill. Get that thing capped, alright? Boots are a big source of suppression, as well as your tree. Now, if you don't use Lightning Hole or you're not there as well, chest can be a very good bonus to spell suppression. Now, as we are using a ton more defenses, we will have to sacrifice in certain places. Damage shifting. Damage shifting is simply taking a certain type of damage as another. For us, we're going to concentrate our physical damage to be shifted into elemental. What's also really good about damage shifting is when you shift the first type of damage, for example, for us physical damage, our armor won't apply to dot damage, to damage over time. But if we do shift it to a elemental type of damage, our resistance will also apply to damage over time as well as hit. So that's like a 2-in-1. Now, how do I damage shift? We're going to be using Lightning Hole, which is one of the strongest items for damage shifting. It gives us a whopping 50% physical damage taken as lightning. Half of our physical damage and damage over time, such as bleeds, will be taken as lightning, meaning they will be reduced by a minimum of 75 because we have capped lightning resistance. And on top of that, if we do use a Topaz Flask, right, which gives us 20% less lightning damage taken, and the 70% increase enchant if we use Mage Blood, we basically take another 39% less damage. That's wild. Using Taste of Hate as well makes 15% of physical damage taken as cold and gives us a great DPS boost. For higher budgets, usage of Watcher's Eye can give an additional damage shift if you're using a purity, whether it's element or one of the types of elements. And Lethal Pride can also help with that. Some nodes will give the 5% physical damage taken as fire bonus. You could get up to 100% with Flask actives, but it's not going to be our top priority. But having at the 50% with Lightning Hole, and then you add maybe another 15 to 20%, physical damage won't be that much of a problem anymore. Dot damage is pretty much what's going to slap the hardest. Except if it's a big Uber boss that gives one big attack, usually damage over time is going to be the worst. Most sources of dots are going to be bleeds, poison, chaos, burning, and other. Now, first of all, good resistance, especially for chaos and burning, as well as avoidance, right? Avoiding ailments, which completely skips the burning phases, is a very good way of mitigating that damage over time. As well, the Arakali as well as the Shakari will also help a ton for dot damage. Avoidance, as the name implies, means you avoid something, which means it just never happens to you. Getting a 100% ailment avoidance means you cannot be frozen, neither shocked, ignited, chilled, which just makes you slower, as well as scorch. For people who don't know what scorch is, it's when your elemental resistances are lowered, and brittled. Brittle is when hits have a higher chance of crit. So if you are brittled, the enemies will have a higher chance of critting against you. Now, immunities and less effect. Being immune is just great because you're immune. So immunity against corrupted blood is going to be a must. It's very easy to get on a corruption, as well as less effect on poison, less effect of curses can really help as well. And you can get pretty much all of them on corruptions on jewels, and if needed, a flask mod. Delaying damage simply means we take our damage with a delay. But if we get hit, and 4 seconds later the hit hits you and you would die, that wouldn't make sense, right? What's great about delaying damage in this game is you can have a certain percentage of that damage to be taken over time. So it won't be dot damage, but it will be split over time. Now there's going to be two ways of adding this tech into our build, and that's going to be thanks to Petrified Blood and Progenesis. Now first, Progenesis. Progenesis causes 25% of our damage taken from hits to be taken over 4 seconds. There's literally no real drawback except that it uses maybe a flask spot and that it's expensive, but that just basically means you can take up to 25% more damage, making your EHP go up by 25%. It's huge. Now, Petrified Blood. What's important to note is that Petrified Blood needs you to be on low life to be active, which is 50% or lower to activate its buff. What's the buff? It says that 40% of your damage, 40% of damage taken from hits will be taken over 4 seconds, right? Now, if we talk about one-shots, having Petrified Blood at 50% HP with the 40% damage over 4 seconds, it will not make your total EHP higher. So if you often die from big single hits, using Petrified Blood will not help you. For example, if you have 2000 life with just 0 defense, you can tank a 2000 damage hit. Now, if you had 2k life with Petrified Blood, right, so you would be in low life, so at 1k, with Petrified Blood, you can tank up to 1660 damage. As well, what you need to note is that you will need to have a good enough life regen or life leech to not die afterwards from that 4-second degen. So then, why would you even use Petrified Blood? The reason many use Petrified Blood that aren't low life builds is because it shines against small consecutive hits, and it works very well with Overleech techs. Now, Overleech and cool tech. Now, let's go more into details of Petrified Blood. Once you are in low life, it is impossible to recover above the 50% unless you use a life flask when Petrified Blood is active. Even if you're not reserved, right? So even unreserved, 100% unreserved, you cannot go above the 50% if you have Petrified Blood, except if you use a flask. Now let's talk about Life Leech, alright? Specifically Life Leech, it's the mechanic when you deal damage, you gain a certain percentage of that damage as life on a certain period of time. What is important to note is that Leech will only stop once you reach maximum life or maximum reserved life. So if you had 25% reserved life, Leech will only stop once you reach 75%. However, let's say you did reserve that 25% of your maximum life and use Petrified Blood, your Leech, as we said, will only stop once you reach 75, but Petrified Blood blocks your Leech at 50%, which means as long as you're dealing damage, you will always be leeching. Okay? Because that said Leech cannot stop because it's not reaching your maximum life. That's great if you take a big hit, right? You have the Overleech that can help you with the damage delay. It won't help you for one-shots. But example, you take a big hit, you already have Leech running, which means that damage over time will pretty much instantly disappear because you had Leech still running. As well, it could be paired with damage while leeching, right? Because if you're on full life, damage while leeching does not apply. But if you have Petrified Blood and you're always hitting something, your damage while leeching is always active. And finally, it can work well with a cool keystone, which is called Strength of Blood. What is Strength of Blood? Strength of Blood gives you a 2% physical reduction per 3% life regeneration. It was nerfed, sadly. It used to be a ton stronger, but considering that we are using Pride and Petrified Blood, there's not really much reasons not to use it, because it's simply one passive point. And if you have a well-rolled Lethal Pride, it will be right next to your tree. Some will use Valpack with it, but because of its nerf, I don't think it's worth using Valpack anymore. Unless you regenerate no life, then maybe it's worth it to spend, the 3 or 4 extra passive points for it. It will come down to personal preference. In my opinion, I don't know if it's really worth it. I will have to do a bit more testing, and I might leave a note in the POBs. Let's talk about Bloodnotch. Bloodnotch is one of the strongest tech. Basically, if the hit did not kill you, you literally won't take the damage. A Bloodnotch is used with Immutable Force, which increases your stun recovery pretty much and making it pretty much instant. And when you're using the stun threshold is based on 60% of your energy shield, and because we have such a low amount of energy shield, every single hit will stun you. Now that means when you receive a stunning hit, which is always, Bloodnotch will activate and will make you recover a certain percentage of that life, right? The max roll is going to be 60%. So if you get hit and Bloodnotch activates, 60% of that hit, you gain it back as life, which is crazy. Then Immutable Force makes you recover from that stunning hit instantly. and you can just continue playing and literally not feel the damage. Now let's talk about Lethal Pride. It's always undervalued, I don't know why, both offensively and defensively. Now, as I said before, I'm repeating, but just to make it concise in one certain area, without Lethal Pride, you cannot get the Strength of Blood. As well, it gives you the 5% physical damage taken as fire. You can go 5, 10, 15, 20% of that, which is huge. It gives you extra Omni. It gives you a chance to deal double damage, as well as increase physical damage, increase strength, etc., etc. The list goes on. Lethal Pride is a must, and don't be afraid to invest into your Lethal Pride. Alright, now let's talk about your flasks. Flasks are not set in stone, okay? Get that thing into your head. Our flasks are called utility flask for a reason. They are useful in certain situations. Some flasks will be useful in one type of content and they won't in another, okay? For example, for the defensive side, some content will deal a certain type of damage. So play with different flasks. Bosses that can be killed, for example, before phases, they might require less defense and more DPS. But when you're playing scripted fights, for example, you'll need a good middle ground. Not just offensive flask, not just defensive flask. Alright? Many players use only one set of flask and they never change them, and I find that's very wrong. You can't call your build min-maxed if you only use 5 types of flask, because every content will need a different type of ways of playing it, right? So if you want it min-max, it's going to be for every single content you run. For Delirium, using the less amount of cold and less amount of lightning damage taken can help a ton, because Delirium maps will deal extra damage in cold and lightning as well as physical, but you can't mitigate that with armor, and especially that we're taking the physical damage taken as elemental. It's not much of a top priority. As well, using phasing can help a ton, right? Because often we're going to be overwhelmed by enemies, right? There's like a swarm of enemy, you can't pass through, you get blocked, you get killed. If you use phasing, you can just walk right through them. Finally, using progenesis can help to not die from one-shots, right? Now, it's important to note, if you know that with progenesis you die one-shot anyways, that's not maybe for Delirium, but example, you're doing a boss fight and you know each single attack can one-shot you, there's no point of using progenesis because you're going to die anyways, right? If you do survive with progenesis, obviously use it, but if not, swap it out for another flask. For Sanctum, you just need big speed and big damage, right? You can use Quicksilver and a Silver Flask instead of a Topaz Flask, for example, right? Because you don't want to really get hit. For scripted bosses, as I said, it will depend on their fight. Some will deal lightning damage, so use a Topaz Flask. Some will deal physical damage. Just make sure maybe to use the flask with the 3% increased life regen, right? That can help. Some content will deal 0 chaos damage. So having a chaos res flask or, prioritizing your chaos res wouldn't be good. It's useless. Swap it out for something else. And if you do run content that deals chaos damage, or example, you have a map mod that says, they wither you or they deal damage as chaos, well then use it, right? So all of that just to say that different content will need different approaches, and the most flexible part of your build is your flasks. It's very easy, you don't have to change your build, swap 5 flasks. The Ascendancy won't change that much. The only exception is going to be that we will be using Wind Ward if needed. Wind Ward basically says you take 3% less damage per gale force. Thanks to Gathering Winds, we gain 1 gale force every time we use a skill. Now, considering we shoot extremely fast, we can get to the cap, which is 10, extremely quickly in pretty much 1 second. As long as we are shooting, we have our 10 gale force up at all times, and if we do get hit, Wind Ward will activate, and will, if we have 10 gale force, make us take 30% less damage. Now, we do lose all of our gale forces if we do get hit, but considering we go extremely fast, we shoot from far, it is pretty rare that we do get hit. And if we do get hit, Wind Ward will help us not getting one shot. Getting Wind Ward is pretty simple. You can spec into it, or you can use a Forbidden Flesh and Flame combo to be able to access it. Usually it's going to be the least or the second least expensive Forbidden Flame and Forbidden Jewel for the Deadeye Ascendancy. My take on defense. As I always preach, guys, offense is the best defense, okay? It's important to not let go of your defense, and I understand most players, they don't wish to play a glass cannon build, and that's 100% normal. Now, it's really important that you do not over-invest into your defense and to cut down your DPS. It will make you die more, okay? But to give you my experience, when I was making the Immortal build, obviously it was not finished yet, but I had around 300,000 EHP, and I swear I would die more often than when I was running my Tornado Shot normally. Now I'm talking about bosses. In maps, I just wouldn't die at 300,000 HP, but I don't think any of you will reach that on, like, unless they purposely make it tanky for that. There's no point. But yeah, so it's important to note that offense is still going to be the best line of defense, and it's important to prioritize DPS and then add defense. What I suggest is the moment you practically one-shot most or nearly one-shot most enemies, you can then start prioritizing defense, okay? Now, you do not need to add every single thing you saw in this video. There's no point of adding every single thing if you can't fit it in your build. Choose which you can incorporate in your build as easy and as simply as possible. Add it to your build and it will help. If you change your build completely, you might brick your build, you might not be happy, and then you might end up even being squishier than before. So be careful for that. All right. What is going to be coming next? Currently, I'm working on a completely different way of playing Tornado Shot. When I say completely, it's completely different. Well, yes, I'm still going to scale DPS like normal Tornado Shots, but it's going to be a different approach. So it takes most of my time to, you know, make the POB, because it's literally like making a new build. As well, my project, I was able to reach a 600,000 EHP average on my tanky Tornado Shot, which is a 2-man project. I'm also working on the highest Tornado Shot build, DPS Tornado Shot, which is currently at 14 billion DPS, and aiming for the 48 to 50 billion, which is also a 2-man project. So that also takes a lot of my time and resources. Now, I think I'm going to be making a normal Tornado Shot, min-maxed into the multi-mirror for, you know, the guys who want high-end Tornado Shot and that are tired of always just copying and just not changing their Tornado Shot. And then after that, once I talk about my 2 projects as well, I will decide whether I want to branch out from my Tornado Shot, if I want to go into crafting or currency making videos. That's something I'll decide later on. Now, hopefully you guys liked the video, and if you do try out my tips, please let me know down in the comments or in the Discord if it was helpful. If you have any feedback or questions, please let me know. Yeah, guys, so have fun and, you know, stay sane, Exile.